Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray Bunker. This is a place for us die-hard fans of 3D where we exclusively look at 3D Blu-rays, not to review the film but to almost entirely focus on the quality of the 3D on offer, with just a short comment at the end about the film itself. And today we're looking at Paul W.S. Anderson's Pompeii from 2014, which was shot in native 3D and has an aspect ratio of 2.39 to 1. Anderson had previously shot 2 or 3 films in native 3D, so you'd hope he'd be pretty accomplished at employing the technique effectively by the time he made this one. So the ash shown over the title card and during the opening shots is really effective, and ash from the eruption, hopefully that's not a spoiler as an exploding Vesuvius is on the cover of the Blu-ray after all, the ash is something that looks pretty good in 3D every time we see it. There are plenty of nicely composed shots too, stuff that looks to me like it was designed with 3D in mind, so you've got people behind bars, which can always be a nice direct route to some noticeable 3D, and there are several scenes in the film featuring this view. They're never particularly special, but they always tend to look okay in 3D. I love this view of some of the Romans' victims dangling from a tree with their swords strung up there too. I'm not sure why the Romans would do that, maybe along with the aqueduct, sanitation and public order, they also pioneered stereoscopic composition too. Anyway, for many scenes in the film, good 3D composition isn't a problem. There's a good variety of nicely laid out scenes, like these street views too. There's loads of foreground, middle ground, background, and plenty of people and things in place all along the Z-axis. So it's a bit of a shame that it's rarely very impressive. I mean, it's definitely in 3D, it just looks to me like they've been a little bit too overcautious with the interaxial. I'm saying this based on how shots like these look in other films, and these really don't have the kind of depth in them that I think they're capable of having. It's not terrible, but it's also not particularly special. There's a shot here which I thought looked a little bit hyper stereo, which is pleasing, but of all the long views across the city, it's the only shot that I thought looked noticeably good. There are quite a few similar views, views from high up looking over large areas, which are as good as flat, like the bay in Pompeii here, or this view of the arena. These look like they would in reality, but I'm always keen for films to show us 3D in a way we can't see it in reality. So as ever, I put it down to being the filmmaker's carefully considered opinion on how to do it best, but even so, these shots aren't really interesting from a 3D point of view. There's a view of buildings which often looks great, and that's the top-down view that we've seen in loads of 3D films, but the trouble is it's only really effective on tall buildings, and as innovative as the Romans were, one thing they didn't give the world was skyscrapers. So the top-down view here doesn't really have too much to work with, unfortunately, and again, it isn't really much of a 3D treat. There's this long shot, which is pretty good. I think the background city is entirely CG and they put some depth into it, so there is noticeable 3D in the entire shot, which if the whole view had been a straightforward location shot, then the background would have been flat, so I think this is another of the film's better 3D moments. More disappointing, I think, than those views of buildings is the view of the film's monster, as in Vesuvius itself. The volcano certainly looks menacing here, and with decent enough CG lava bubbling away there, but what it doesn't look is particularly three-dimensional. Another problem as I see it is that most of the close-ups are shot very cinematically, so that's with a very shallow depth of field, which is fine for a regular film, but not really a good way to show off the 3D. So all of these, whilst nicely lit and good opportunities for Carrie-Anne Moss and Emily Browning and even Kit Harington to do some nice close-up acting and help the drama of the film unfold, what they don't ever do is make you enjoy the fact that you're watching a 3D film. Other than some of those long shots, I didn't spot a single 2D shot in the film, so it's not one of those ones where you ever wonder whether it's in 3D. It definitely is, but there were really extremely few, maybe none if I'm honest, of those proper 3D wow moments. There were certainly some nice shots, and one of my favourites was this scene with Emily Browning where shafts of light are coming through the door in a genuinely impressive way. I really like it, and I guess the filmmakers did too as they cut back to it later. There's also a good view up the tunnel here that leads into the arena, and we see a nice deep shot of the guards going up it, which is another shot they used a couple of times, so I think perhaps they knew when they had a good 3D shot and wanted to make the most of it. I think maybe even better is this view of one of the main characters. The depth here is as strong as in the last shot, so it's very good. I think more importantly, it's at a dramatic moment when he's about to potentially face death in a fight. I always really appreciate it when the 3D is dialed up at an important dramatic point. It seems like an obvious way to use the tool in an effective way. But speaking of the fight though, and there are a few fights in the film, I think they all suffer from some quick-fire editing, which is never really a good thing in 3D, so none of the fights are 3D high points in the film. If you're a fan of pop-out stuff, then I'd say this film ranges from somewhere between disappointing and weird. Disappointing stuff includes things like this thrown axe. It's one of those typically brief shots that only lasts a few frames, so really doesn't work effectively. And similarly, this falling beam comes down in a split second, so I don't think it's particularly brilliant either. From this 2D look at the shot, you might assume that Kit Harington's hand is reaching out of the screen, but it isn't. And Kiefer Sutherland's hand, though, does emerge a little bit out of the screen here as he's about to give a thumbs up or down verdict on the quality of the 3D, but it's hardly a classic piece of stereoscopy. Worse than these, though, I feel, are some of the decisions I'd almost class as perverse. It's a film filled with swords, so you could reasonably expect some of those to break out of the screen at some point, but Kiefer Sutherland's here remains firmly behind the screen, and here's Kiefer with his sword out again. I'd have thought it was an obvious chance to poke the sword out in a bit of gratuitous 3D, but not only don't they do that, but you can't even see the sword in the frame. It just seems really strange to me. Or here, Kit gets a whipping, nice enough 3D composition, but you might be waiting for a whip to crack out of the screen, but that never happens either. Then there's this line of soldiers throwing their spears. So that could be really good, seeing them arc up and out of the screen, but they don't. The missed opportunities I've just described might sound like they're wisely avoiding gimmicky uses of 3D, and fair enough, maybe they thought this film was above that sort of thing, but I'm not sure that it is. I see its primary purpose as being a fun romp set against the background of an exploding volcano, which sounds to me exactly like the kind of film that should be happy to shove things out of the screen every now and then. I've read reviews of the film that talk about fireballs spewing out of Vesuvius and out of the screen. This is usually the kind of thing that non-3D fan reviewers will lazily say based on assumption rather than what actually happens, and none of these fireballs ever really deliver anything in the way of pop-out. You might assume from these stills that they do, but they don't. With their smoking trails, they're even a bit disappointing in terms of the amount of depth they offer too. The depth throughout really is all rather too mild for my liking. There is this bit where the pyroclastic flow comes up and envelops us, which is pretty good, and the cloud here is full of ash particles too, so I'd say this is another of the film's better shots. One of the other noticeably strong 3D shots is this not especially exciting view of the carriage. The grass in the foreground looks really good, and it's a nice composition with loads of depth. Not exactly dramatic though. You'd have thought Roman architecture would offer plenty of views like this one, but this is just about the only one of these in the film, and the 3D here is really strong. The only problem is, this is a shot not with the camera moving down into the columns, but it's panning right to left across them, so we get to enjoy this view only for a split second. So I think I've been maybe a bit hard on the 3D in this film. Like I think I said, it's all definitely in 3D, so that's good, but pretty much all of it is mild, and it never really delivers when you hope that maybe it's going to. Like, there are two main hero versus villain showdowns, and they're both points in the film where I think the 3D should have been at its most powerful, but it never shines in these scenes at all. So a quick word on the film itself. I think this got generally unfavourable reviews from the critics, like all of poor old Paul W.S. Anderson's films do really, but I like the guy, and I enjoy a few of his films, especially Event Horizon, which has got a pretty strong fan base I think, and I actually enjoyed this one quite a bit. Obviously it's not a rival to Gladiator or anything like that, but I thought it was good fun. I even enjoyed Kiefer Sutherland's villain with his strange accent and slightly strange performance. Emily Browning was good, Carrie-Anne Moss is a class act, so is Jared Harris, and Adewale Akinye Agbaje made a likeable and convincing gladiator, a bit more convincing than Kit Harington I'd say, who seemed maybe a bit too fresh-faced to be playing the alpha lead, but I liked him in this anyway. The story was fun enough and perhaps even took an unexpected turn somewhere along the way. Also, I thought it was a great-looking film, and the effects were really good for a non-mega-budget film. For all Paul Anderson says in the commentary about it being an extremely realistic depiction of the eruption, it was really sort of daft nonsense, but it was done perfectly slickly. I just wish the 3D had been dialed up a notch or two, or three, for more of the time. If you're going to watch the film, and I wouldn't advise anyone not to, then I'd say definitely watch it in 3D, but I don't think it's in any way close to 3D demo material. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for another 3D Blu-ray review. Until then, thanks for looking in on this one. Cheers for now. Bye bye.